Hi, my name is Mark Ias, and welcome to pandemic video number 8. This one is entitled How Not to Grow Weary. And this comes from something I read in Galatians chapter 6, verse 9 in the Bible that says, "Let us not become weary in doing good, for at the proper time we will reap a harvest if we do not give up." So I read that not too long ago at about day number 282, depending on how you're counting, of our lockdown. And I thought, okay, how do you not grow weary, particularly in doing good? So this video is a result of me asking myself that question. So a disclaimer here, I am not a professional counselor. I am not a psychiatrist. I'm not a psychologist. I'm going to offer some of my observations from the Bible, from the web, and from my own experiences. So I'm not the only one to ask these questions. This is now all over the web, how to avoid burnout and fatigue. Here's a Wall Street Journal article that says, pandemic fatigue is real and it's spreading. Collective exhaustion with coronavirus restrictions has emerged as a formidable adversary for governments. The wartime rhetoric that world leaders initially used to rally support is gone. And here's another one from Healthline that says, what the ongoing pandemic is teaching us is that there are more ways for us to feel as though we aren't getting our needs met than we may have realized. And there are articles from Psychology Today, the Houston Methodist blog, and one concept that's interesting to look at, and you can find some of this also on the web, is how people demonstrate resilience, especially in war-torn areas or refugee-type situations. And I thought about the fact that not only are we going to need to deal with burnout, fatigue, weariness right now, but after this is over, after this pandemic, and yes, there will be an after, we're going to have to deal with the aftermath. Now, I want to take this opportunity to travel back once again to the times back in the Old Testament when Jerusalem was under siege by the Assyrians, and we'll make actually a reference to that same city being under siege by the Babylonians as well. I used that device in my first couple of videos as a comparison. And so I'm going to consolidate some of the big ideas from the many websites and compare those to Hezekiah and what the Jews went through during the Assyrian siege, and sprinkle in some Proverbs and some stuff that I've learned from the software industry as well. And hopefully this provides a way of looking at how not to grow weary. And maybe it causes you to stop and think, and maybe gives you some tools to fight with. So let's look at a different prophet's view on a different siege on Jerusalem. This time, we're not talking about the Assyrians, but rather the Babylonians besieging Jerusalem. And this is from the prophet Ezekiel. That siege came maybe 125 years or so after the Assyrians laid siege. And in Ezekiel chapter 4, verse 1, it says, "Now, son of man, take a block of clay, put it in front of you, and draw the city of Jerusalem on it. And then lay siege to it, erect siege works against it, and build a ramp up to it, set up camps against it, and put battering rams around it. Then take an iron pan and place it as an iron wall between you and the city, and turn your face toward it. It will be under siege, and you shall besiege it. This will be a sign to the people of Israel." So one of the more interesting facets of a prophet's job sometimes was to illustrate. And in this case, you can imagine Ezekiel getting out his Lego building blocks and creating a little miniature Jerusalem and laying siege to it and showing people how it's going to be. But notice at the end of the same chapter in verse 16, He then said to me, Son of man, I'm about to cut off the food supply in Jerusalem. The people will eat rationed food in anxiety and drink rationed water in despair, for food and water will be scarce. They will be appalled at the sight of each other and will waste away because of their sin. Now, it does talk about because of their sin, but notice the impact on the people. The real impact of the siege is they're anxious, they're in despair, and they're beginning to actually think that they don't look so good, appalled at the sight of each other. Now, I don't know if that's happened to you on our Zoom calls to look at somebody and go, hey, you don't look so good. But I have noticed that more people are wearing hats to hide their hair and not showing you anything below their shoulders and so forth. So maybe the rest of what you might see could be appalling. I don't know. But we certainly are anxious. And we certainly, some of us are despairing or feeling empty. And you can go to websites and you can see signs of burnout. And I don't want to go through that, but certainly I think that we're seeing some of that: exhaustion, isolation, irritability. Boy, if it were irritability alone, the whole country is showing signs of this burnout. So, what are some big ideas about what we could do that I have observed from both the Bible and combining that with the web and my own industry that I'm involved with as a career? Well, number one big idea is harness change. Harness change. Let's review a little about Hezekiah and his character and rule. In 2 Chronicles 31:20, it says, "This is what Hezekiah did throughout Judah, doing what was good and right and faithful before the Lord his God. In everything that he undertook in the service of God's temple and in obedience to the law and the commands, he sought his God and worked wholeheartedly, and so he prospered." And so here you see this writer saying that Hezekiah was a great guy. He had great opinions about Hezekiah, and seems as though Hezekiah was a man who led his people and knew his people well. But that didn't prevent something bad from happening, something that was not planned for. In chapter 32, verse 1, it says this: "After all that Hezekiah had so faithfully done, Sennacherib, king of Assyria, came and invaded Judah. He laid siege to the fortified cities, thinking to conquer them for himself." So you can see, even the writer says, after everything he did, this bad thing still happened. And we see Hezekiah yet reacting with the same strength of character in the face of this. In verse 2 it says, "When Hezekiah saw that Sennacherib had come and that he intended to wage war against Jerusalem, he consulted with his officials and military staff about blocking off the water from the springs outside the city, and they helped him." In verse 5, "Then he worked hard repairing all the broken sections of the wall and building towers on it. He built another wall outside that one and reinforced the terraces of the city of David, and he also made large numbers of weapons and shields." We've heard this proverb before. This is in Proverbs 16:9. "In their hearts humans plan their course, but the Lord establishes their steps." Or you may have heard the expression, I think it may be a book title even, "We plan, God laughs," or something like that. Harness change. Don't fight it. Here's a concept from some of the websites about resilience. And it says this: "Live with the unpredictable. Plan what you can, but understand plans will change." Now, even from within the software industry that I'm involved with, there's this idea now of agile development, and it's become so popular, this agile development, that now everyone's doing it, and it's sort of the industry standard. The cornerstone of this methodology of agile development is the idea of harnessing change or taking advantage of change. And it came about in recognition of the fact that when you do long involved software projects, you don't know at the beginning what's going to happen in the middle or at the end. And so the industry has changed. So harness change. And you might say, well, that's not so easy. Well, it might be a little easier if you understand big idea number 2. And big idea number 2 is activate your network. Okay, let's go back to Hezekiah in 2 Chronicles 32, verse 4. They gathered a large group of people who blocked all the springs and the streams that flowed through the land, in reference to what we talked about before. And then in Isaiah 37, verse 1, a different reference to the same siege. But when King Hezekiah heard this, and this was the threat that the armies of Sennacherib made to Jerusalem, when he heard this, he tore his clothes, put on sackcloth, and went into the temple of the Lord. He sent Eliakim the palace administrator, Shebna the secretary, and the leading priests, all wearing sackcloth, to the prophet Isaiah, son of Amos. So one thing you see Hezekiah doing is he remained deeply engaged socially. And that's a key. And if you look back at those accounts, you can see that Hezekiah worked with his officials and his military, and they worked it together. Go back to Proverbs 27:17. Iron sharpens iron, so one man sharpens another. Proverbs 18:24. A man of many companions may come to ruin, but there is a friend who sticks closer than a brother. Proverbs 13:20. Whoever walks with the wise becomes wise, but a companion of fools will suffer harm. Proverbs 11:14. Where there is no guidance, a people falls, but in abundance of counselors there is safety. And again, even from the websites about resilience, they talk about this idea of responsibility for welfare and protection of others. Now, does that mean you're responsible for everything about everyone? Well, no, because you're not God, but you can do what you can do. You can participate in the community. And you know, even the multiple nature of God that we frequently refer to as the Trinity, the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit, is really intended to convey a sense of community. Even from within my industry, the software industry, you can think about the internet. You can think about crowdsourcing. You can think about crowdfunding. The internet itself, strength is based on the fact that it is a network of multiple computing devices. You don't rely on just one. If one of those devices goes down, the internet stays because it is a network of devices. So activate your personal network. Now, the kinds of things you can do in a pandemic are limited. But there are some things that we can do for one another in reaching out, and there are some things that you can do that I would say are indirect. Ask a medical professional, you know, what can I do to assist my community? You can wash your hands, of course. Your mother told you to do that already. But we can do things as well for one another, like wearing masks and so forth. And maybe you don't agree about the idea of being forced to wear a mask, but would you do it if it would benefit somebody else because you were part of a community? You might. But in any case, activate your personal network. Big idea number 3, face facts. Again, a concept from those websites about resilience. It says this: you don't ignore the difficult. You mourn and you grieve as needed, but you don't do it alone, and then you continue on together. Look what it says in Isaiah 37, verse 18. This is Hezekiah before God in the temple, trying to determine what to do about these threats from Sennacherib's army. And he says this, he says, It is true, Lord, that the Assyrian kings have laid waste to all these peoples and their lands. They have thrown their gods into the fire and destroyed them, for they were not gods, but only wood and stone fashioned by human hands. Now, Lord our God, deliver us from his hand, so that all the kingdoms of the earth may know that you, Lord, are the only God. Now, Hezekiah says, hey, it's true. The Assyrians really did lay waste all these other people, and they threw out all their gods. And then Hezekiah goes on to draw a distinction, saying, yeah, all those other things that were thrown into the fire as gods may have been worshipped, but they were just fashioned by human hands. And we think of you, God, as the real creator. And so you're different. And so I want you to show yourself, to prove yourself to be different. And so Hezekiah notes what is real and what is not. And look in Proverbs 17:17. It says, a friend loves at all times, and a brother is born for adversity. And the Bible makes that distinction that a friend is always there, and a brother is born not out of the good times necessarily, but out of the adverse times, the bad times, the times when you need to face the facts. And you know, a true brother or sister would be the one that would help you face the facts, that would not necessarily smooth over those and try to pretend they weren't there. And you know, again, even in the software industry, one of the things we say as managers is, hey, bad news should travel at least as quickly as good news. It does us no good when we're working on a project to ignore something bad that happened or some delay that's going to occur. It'd be better to know right away and be able to do something about it. But face the facts. And you know, for some of us, we need to face the facts about the good things as well. There are certainly some things that we have learned or we have been made aware of during this pandemic that are good. And we should face those facts as well. Sometimes take a moment to back up and go, okay, what have we figured out here? What have we learned? So face the facts, good or bad, mourn together, face the facts. And big idea number 4, trust God. Again, a concept from some of these websites about resilience. They would say this about those who demonstrate resilience. They have a, quote, strong belief that the world and life has meaning, hyphen, having faith and hope. Notice Hezekiah's faith in this passage, 2 Chronicles 32:7. He's talking to his people. He says, be strong and courageous. Do not be afraid or discouraged because of the king of Assyria and the vast army with him, for there is greater power with us than with him. With him is only the arm of flesh, but with us is the Lord our God to help us and to fight our battles. And the people gained confidence from what Hezekiah, the king of Judah, said. Now, in order for them to truly have gained confidence, you and I both know that when he said these things, they had to be gut belief for him. Because you know how it feels when somebody is just saying the words and trying to convince you because they have some ulterior motive. But somebody really believes what they're saying, it comes through. And his trust in God, Hezekiah's trust in God, convinced them, helped them to gain confidence in spite of this massive army besieging outside their city. Proverbs 23:18 says, surely there is a future and your hope will not be cut off. Proverbs 18:10 says, the name of the Lord is a strong tower and the righteous man runs into it and is safe. Proverbs 3:5-6, trust in the Lord with all your heart and do not lean on your own understanding. In all your ways acknowledge him and he will make straight your paths. Even in Hebrews 11, there's a whole chapter that references the people of faith, and it starts with saying, now faith is confidence in what we hope for and assurance about what we do not see. And what follows after that is a list of people that had faith. And I think that at least partly it's supposed to be an encouragement, as if to say, hey, we've done this before. We can do it again. You know, even simple, challenging scriptures, such as the one that we hear around this season of year, this holiday season, this is out of Acts 20:35. It says, "In everything I did, I showed you that by this kind of hard work we must help the weak, remembering the words the Lord Jesus himself said, 'It is more blessed to give than to receive.'" We all kind of know this. Many of us were taught this even from a very young age. And we all know how we feel after we do something nice for someone, even as small a thing. But it can still be hard to do, especially if you've been isolated for some time and maybe have not reached out to someone else in quite a while. But we know even that little bit of trust, that faith in God, it warms us. And we think about that during the holiday season. Now imagine how a big step of faith would energize you and warm you. So how about you? Do you think any of these big ideas would help energize you, give you strength, keep you from growing weary? Harness change, activate your network, face facts, trust God. Let us not grow weary in doing good.